Zé, encosta aqui a porta. Boas? Uh, tentar fazer aqui uma cena, mas há uma cena que os computadores ainda não conseguem fazer e eu sei que dá para fazer. E quando der, vai revolucionar muita coisa. Acho eu. Acho que se começa a pensar de uma maneira diferente, eu tenho a certinha que aquilo vai dar. Agora, daqui a quantos anos? Então, tentar fazer aqui isso. A ideia. Ou 30x. E isto é uma coisa que eu queria usar no meu jogo, mas sei que não vai dar. Scale. A primeira cena é esta, que é isto tinha que conseguir. Quando eu fizesse aqui, isto tinha que ter volume. Isto não é o real. Isto aqui está a pegar na imagem e fazê-la toda assim. Mas quando a gente. Esta cena não está bem real porque quando a gente passa assim, vê que o boneco não lhe acontece isso. E ele também devia de ficar assim. Então, será que dá para fazer isso no Blender?
Hello there, my name is Ismos, and today we're going to be looking at low statistics. So it gives us GPU here so that everything is faster, and I'm going to start with samples at 10 so that my viewport doesn't slow down too much. Yes, we have the transmission switch to try and set to have the volume. Yes. We do one of this. Just bring the head related or the thickness of the piece of glass. Now this for a second here. Just move. Yes, as you can see, the thickness of this with a solidify modifier is just that thick. Without that, it's calculated as the entire thing is a solid surface, making it distort everything too much. You can see here how much is distorting it. Just bring this back. You can see now.
Exclusão.
Hey everyone, my name is Olav and today I'll teach you how to render glass in Eevee in Blender 2.8. As always, it's going to be quick and easy, so let's get started. You can download Blender 2.8 in the link in the description. Okay. And before we add, right click to select a sun and then change the rotate by setting the roughness to 0. And then set the transmission to 1. We also need to enable screen space refraction to make it completely transparent, and then go into the render settings to enable the screen space refraction.
Screen pace. Maybe. Tá igual.
So scroll down to screen space refraction, enable it, and then enable refraction as well. And as you can see now, it's completely transparent. Now the next step, which is optional, is to add a background image so that you can see how the glass works. So click use nodes, and then in color, the texture, and you need to add the background image. And hide the overlay, and look through the camera, and then click N, and set. So click S to scale, and then you can also go up to. And that's how you make glass in Eevee. I'll post new Eevee tutorials very soon, so make sure to subscribe, and thanks for watching.
Celebrate the holidays with Si Passione, Giorgio Armani.
Hi, Remington from Southern Shoddy 3D here, and Blender's here to bring a little bit of positivity into our 2020 with the new 2.91 update, which means it's time for a feature video in less than 5 minutes. However, they were very gracious with this update, so it's almost 5 minutes. If you'd like a full list of all the bug fixes and all the features, check out the link in the description below. But for now, let's get started. One of the coolest new features is the improved Boolean system. It now has an exact solver which handles overlapping geometry better. This method is slower, so the old option is still available as a fast option. Thanks to this new system, some of the sculpt tools such as trim will be used a lot in the upcoming geometry nodes. This new feature opens up quite a few cool artistic abilities previously only available in other 3D applications. Booleans are a major asset in motion graphics animations as well. A collection option has now been added as well, allowing you to use an entire collection as an operand type, like in this example. The knife tool has also benefited and has options to handle overlapping geometry better. The ocean modifier's performance has been improved by adding different resolutions for viewport and render options. Alembic sequences now support motion blur now that they contain velocity data. Subdivision Surface has several new options, making it more compatible with other software. Curved Bevels now has a fill cap option, and a custom profile option has been added as a bevel mode. This feature has a lot of potential for creating intricate moldings and other creations. Are you bad at Blender? If so, it's going to be much harder to blame it on the interface, because it just got a whole lot of improvements to make things easier. Property Search is an awesome new feature for beginner users or Blender users with bad memories. It adds a search bar at the top of your Properties panel, allowing you to search automatically expanding and collapsing panels. Also, welcome Fuzzy Search, so it's more forgiving with results. For example, searching SSS and nodes will bring up subsurface scattering. Outliner has had a large update. Modifiers, constrainers, and grease pencil effects can now be dragged and dropped in the outliner. This means you can spend less time digging through submenus and get more done in the outliner. Collections now have color tags, which is set from the right-click menu, great for organizing full scenes. Mode toggling can now be done in the outliner. Some minor control updates are you can walk left and right in the outliner navigation and shift-click to toggle visibility for bone children. Make sure you're sitting, because Blender is not responsible if you fall over from shock and hurt yourself when you hear about this next feature. 3 new volume modifiers have been added, including the amazing Mesh to Volume modifier, which will convert your mesh into volumes. The Volume Displace modifier displaces a volume using a procedural texture. The Volume 2 Mesh modifier allows you to generate a mesh from a volume object. For example, make a ManaFlow sim into mesh for stylized fluids. Thanks to your contributions to the Blender Dev Fund, all the coders on the sculpting team were able to buy a third arm so that they could code faster. At least, that's the only way I can explain that they're adding so many features every update, right? Cloth sculpting was already the coolest sculpting feature around, but I guess that wasn't good enough because it just got better. It now supports collisions with scene colliders. A soft body plasticity property has been added to the cloth brush. There's a new cloth grab brush and cloth snake hook brush, which is just fun to play with. Several new properties, filters, and modes have been added to existing tools. One notable addition is the new scale cloth filter. Multi-res supports base mesh sculpting, which allows you to sculpt on the base mesh while previewing with higher resolutions. This even allows you to use tools like the cloth brush with higher resolution. An eraser has been added to erase multi-res displacement. This is great for fixing mistakes or cleaning up edges. New gesture tools have been added, including the line project gesture, line gestures, mask, line, union, and join modes for trim tools, and more. With the new trim tools and join union mode, you can pretty much add geometry in sculpt mode by drawing on it. A completely new brush, the boundary brush, has been added. It controls the shape of mesh boundaries and is useful for creating cloth and hard surface base meshes. XYZ symmetry per mesh and fading interactive geometry overlay have been added to multi-object sculpting, making for better performance. You can now lock HDRI rotation to use EV materials as matte caps and render overlays with constructive modifiers enabled. There's now an invert smooth to enhance details tool. These are the most notable changes, but there are plenty more filters, tools, and properties that have been added for advanced sculptors. Check out the link in the description below. Grease Pencil has seen several smaller user interface updates to improve its workflow. The Convert to Mesh Strokes tool has been improved and creates layers and materials with the original object name. There's a new holdout material to allow open holes and filled areas. This is useful for layering objects and compositing style tricks in the viewport. A new trace images operator uses the PoTrace library has been added, which is awesome for converting sketches or logos to Grease Pencil. Currently, it supports black and white only. Several new operators have been added, including a cleanup frames operator, which it helps with meshes that are static for several frames. Import and export options don't usually trend on social media, but they really improve Blender's studio workflow, making it more powerful for large teams. Alembic has seen vast improvements, including exporting invisible objects, writing duplicate objects as instances, exporting custom properties, vertex interpolation, and animated vertex colors. Classic Blender users can rejoice. Old large files will now load faster. Library overrides, library linking, and the handling of shading and add-on importers have all been improved. Collisions just got easier and faster with compound shapes. You can now combine multiple primitive shapes into a concave shape. Some useful new features have been added to the graph editor for animators. You can now insert all keyframe types without changing the shape. Curves are snappier, allowing for quicker easing with less keyframes. They added an active keyframe selection color to make it easier to tell which keyframe is active. The snap menu now supports snapping to the 2D cursor. Copy to selection has been added to keyframes. This could save a ton of time with repeat animations on multiple objects. The nonlinear animation editor has seen several changes and improvements, making it easier to sync length, enter edit mode, and insert or modify keys outside of the strip bounds. Child of constraint now automatically sets inverse when applying, so you don't have that moment of panic that you just destroyed your character when applying a new constraint. The community and the animation module team was largely involved in these improvements. The image editor draw rewrite is amazing. It's so much faster. Here it is tiling effortlessly with a 16K HDRI. The old image editor couldn't handle these kind of loads. The UV image editor has also improved alpha blending, support for emissive colors, and a notably improved performance with viewing final render results. This is great news if you do your compositing in Blender. The sequencer has seen some improvements, reducing video decoding by about 30%. Motion tracking compatibility has been improved, and if you were somehow able to get one, NVIDIA RTX 3000 series graphic cards now support without runtime compilation. As usual, there are just hundreds of minor bug fixes, features, and other small improvements. If you'd like to see that full list, check out the link in the description below. If you haven't already, go check out the Blender Conference 20 online now. Blender is a special software built up by the community and an amazing team of developers. This year's conference showed how Blender affects people's lives, sometimes in a very personal way. It's clear how much the community and team care about their product and users. It's worth checking out. If you like what you see, go support Blender and join the development fund.
Hey there, gentlemen. Today we're going to be making some potions, whether it be health potions or stamina potions or mana potions. Are you getting the impression that I haven't made these yet and that these renders are coming after the tutorial? Well, that is indeed true, because I'm going to be freestyling this one and hopefully we will get some good looking potions. But before we get to the potion making part of this tutorial, a huge thank you to, I think, the first sponsor on this channel. Pretty sure that lines up. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this tutorial. Your internet traffic, whether it be just what it is you look up or what it is you pay for, so in fact credit card numbers and stuff like that, can actually be exposed to hackers, malicious people that want your information, and this is the exact kind of traffic that you want to be encrypting, which is exactly what NordVPN offers. You can use NordVPN on your computer, you can use it on your phone, you could use it in whatever country you're going to. This is a kind of security measure that you are bringing along with you, and there are additional benefits beyond just masking your internet traffic that may be of interest to you. The main one is going to be avoiding or circumventing region blocking, which is this idea of, let's say, Netflix or HBO Go or whatever it may be has a show that is only available in a certain country or vice versa. Avoiding region blocking will let you watch shows that will make it look like you're in that country and you can access all sorts of things, and this is also useful for accessing websites that may be banned in certain countries. Long story short, it makes all your internet usage, what it is you can access, what it is that you are actually showing and revealing to people, it makes all that something that you have a lot more control over, and this is the purpose of using NordVPN. And while the annual subscription is already super affordable, I'm going to make a deal that is going to make that much sweeter. This is a Black Friday deal where every purchase of a 2-year plan will get you 4 additional months for free. To access this deal, what you're going to do is go to my link in the description, which is going to be nordvpn.com/defaultscube, and you can use promo code defaultscube to get access to this Black Friday deal. So hopefully that is something you are into. But now back to making some magical potions in Blender. Let's do it. I guess we may as well start. So I haven't done modeling in a while, which is kind of a cool thing because, I don't know, every single tutorial of mine recently has been like materials and nodes and stuff, so it's good to get into the easy stuff. I'm not throwing shade, Josh. I'm just saying modeling's easy. Either way, start with the cylinder. We're going to have a lot of rotational segments, so it has a lot of rotational resolution in some sense. We're starting off by making the glass bottle, is the essence of this. And to reshape this, I like to go into edit mode, scale, shift Z. So easy, so easy. None of the complexities of nodes, just so easy. I'm going to make it about the thickness that I want the drinking funnel, you know, the thing at the top to be, and then we're going to widen the rest. To do that, we're going to Control R to loop cut, bring that up, and then I'm going to go for kind of like a Erlenmeyer flask kind of look. I don't know if you guys ever took a chemistry class, but this is the thing you use to boil. No, use a boiling flask for that. I remember that from Breaking Bad. Control B to bevel, scroll up. This is just so it has a nice rounded base. I think an Erlenmeyer flask is made for mixing because of the flat bottom. I know you're definitely not supposed to put it on a Bunsen burner. Whatever. I don't know if you guys even took chemistry. We're going to bevel the bottom. We also want to smooth the transition, or maybe only very slightly smooth the transition between like neck to base. So I'm just going to make a couple divisions here, not too big. Boop. And yeah, I mean, already this is kind of like the essence of the bottle. Super simple. Couple things that we are going to do. First of all, delete the top of this. So this is kind of like a infinitely thin kind of like surface or shell of a bottle. By the way, I should save. Call it something unique, like this is going to be available on Patreon, just so you guys know. This is going to be an infinitely thin thing, and we're going to give it thickness using the solidify modifier, but for now, just treat this like, you know, something that has no thickness. I guess we also want to give this thing a lip. I mean, listen,
graduação
this is
tem.
my first time making it, at least
Então,
live,
esta aqui
so
faz
I'm a
com a
bit,
mais
you know, strapped for ideas
Esta
here.
tinha
But I'm just gonna scale this to
mais
make the
10.
lip, and just like
Se eu
last
fizer
time, we
scale
bevel.
Y, não
Whoops,
sei se vai
Control
dar.
B, not Control V.
Se eu
Who
meter,
knows what that could mean?
scale
So something like
Y,
this. And you know what? We can actually
Z.
bevel two things at the same time and
Não
have
tem
them
graduação
interact.
nenhuma.
So those are called bevel collisions, by the way.
Scale
You control B,
Y.
they pass through each other, you hit C, and now they've collided, which is a cool thing about bevels. You can do that. But I don't think I actually want them to collide. Something like that should be good. Yeah,
Mas
I think
mesmo se eu
that's
fizer
generally
isto,
a good looking shape.
scale
Now that we're done,
Y,
right click, shade smooth,
Agora,
looking
guia
good.
Y.
Again, to give this thing
Se eu
thickness,
tivesse esta
because if we
lente
gave
desta
this like a
grossura,
glass
mas como esta
BSDF,
base
or
é
in
toda
general,
direita,
we tried to make it like, you know,
e esta também,
glassy and reflective and all that, it
eu
would
vejo
look
as
weird
coisas
because, you know,
iguais.
physically
Nada
accurate
aumenta
glass
nem
is not
diminui.
infinitely thin.
Nem
Okay,
que
so here, actually, we should give this thing a
vidro
name. We'll call this
tenha 40
Erlenmeyer. Oh, that's not how you spell it, dude.
face é toda plana,
Erlenmeyer.
esta
Well, that's
Nada
definitely my best
aumenta nem
attempt.
diminui.
Erlenmeyer flask, we're going to add a solidify modifier,
Agora,
which is
se
a
ela
modifier
tiver
that
assim,
takes your
faz com
geometry
que
and
tenha
kind of
mais
applies
10.
a
Se eu
extrude
fizer
along normal,
scale
at least when you set it to simple. I don't
Se
know
eu
what
fizer
complex
assim,
does, probably something stupid hard. With a distance,
eu
extruding
acho
with the
que isto tem que ir no
distance of the
máximo.
thickness. Now, you could decide whether you want to extrude inwards or outwards. And by the way, if it's kind of hard to see what's going on here, go to this triangle. It has a name. It's called Object Data Properties. Go to Normals, enable this.
Se eu fizer assim,
This is just going to make it so the
Uma
auto
dioptria.
smoothing only happens if the
Duas.
angle between two normals is
4.
within a
Eu acho
certain
que no máximo
threshold.
pode ir até
So we can make
fazer
that
tipo
threshold
um
large or
círculo,
small, whatever.
metade de um círculo.
What was the
Se eu
point? The
fizer
point
já
was the
assim,
solidify
não
modifier.
sei
You could
se
either have it
aumentar
go
a
inwards or
graduação.
outwards. I'm going to recommend outwards
Mas
because
acho
we're
que
actually
mesmo
going to
assim
have
aumenta.
another use for this
Isso aí
bottle
é
that
uma
relies
coisa
on the
que já não é
inside of
bem-
the geometry being unaltered, so not like the solidify going in here.
Então, é isto
And that's
que
just
faz
going to
com
be for
que
making the
aumente
liquid. So you just give it a
imagem.
thickness. I wonder what even
Esta
thickness
é
does. I don't
inverso.
mess with a lot of these settings because, again, modeling
Esta.
is easy and I don't touch it that
Fazer
often.
aqui o mesmo.
Okay, cool. Let's turn this into glass just so we can feel like we're making progress, even though, you know, in the grand scheme of things, we're all just headed towards death, but that's fine. I'm just going to set up the render scene, set it to cycles, GPU. This is just up to you. I mean, actually, no, this is not up to you. You definitely want to be using cycles whenever you're dealing with glass and reflection and stuff like that. So first thing I wanted to set up, and this is why I have all these render settings open, is in the world properties. I'm going to set up an HDRI. My hands are moving faster than my brain. Wouldn't be the first time. I'm just going to pick a random HDRI I found from HDRI Haven. We might switch this out later. To make it invisible, we're going to make it transparent, and very soon it's going to be important to enable transparent glass because we don't want it showing in the background of the glass. But first of all, let's make it glassy. You don't need to mess with any of this. Super simple, just add in glass BSDF. It's slightly more like expensive maybe than some other options, but it does look like glass, and it would look more like glass if we enabled this setting. So now we can actually see through it and put whatever we want in the background. Notice that the reflections are still like dependent on our HDRI. Right? Like you can still see the window of whatever room we were in, but we can actually see through it, there's transparency. And this would be a good time to play around with the thickness. So when this is set to 0, this is what we had, right? Which is why I recommended we add a tiny bit of thickness. And I guess the thicker it is, the more it refracts. And I imagine these things are actually fairly thick because they're meant to hold like certain chemicals like hydrochloric acid and things that would just burn your hand and you don't want to mess with. So that's pretty cool. Oh, by the way, another thing, I think this one's not accurate to the chemistry, but if you were to like to inset this and like add some like loop cuts and stuff like that, just for a idea, you don't have to do this, but just as an idea, you can select the bottom face. Let me do this in solid view. Proportional editing, so we kind of have a radius of effect, and you can make kind of like a curved bottom that again the solidify modifier like curves with, and this just adds like an interesting shape to our glass. Again, I want to say this isn't like physically, or at least not physically, in terms of practical use, not accurate, but come on, we're doing like a health potion. So I'm just gonna add a bit of a lip. Nobody complained about a bit of a lip. Just looks cool. Okay, so let's see. We have our glass BSDF. IOR is index of refraction. It means what coefficient. It's a number. Let's start with that. It's a number that describes how light reacts as it passes through the medium as compared to air. So air, or perfect air, like a vacuum, has an IOR of 1. Glass has, I think, 1.5, so slightly higher than 1.45. If you get ridiculous with this number, you can see we're getting interesting effects. I wonder, does this let you go negative? It does. Whatever, different video. 1.5, you can also play with the roughness, like how frosty is this. I recommend either keeping it at 0 or at something low, like 0.1, just so it's a bit foggy. And if you want to add like a lot of, I don't know, I guess realism, we could have this roughness, again, which areas are frosty or not. It could be dependent on some kind of like noise smudge map, which is kind of a cool idea. So what we could do is we could do a color ramp, just make it a bit more contrasty, nothing crazy, bit of detail, bit of roughness. And remember, where it's black, we're going to have a roughness of 0, perfectly shiny, and otherwise white, which is, what is that? That's going to be a roughness of 1. So we want this one to be a lot lower if it does achieve here, so something like 0.2, so that we still have the gradient, but it's not super rough in like the dusty area, so let's see what that looks like. So now we have some areas that are rough and some that are not, and this would be a good time to enable your denoiser, boys. I'm not going to do it because I know some people have like GPUs that ain't too hot and I don't want to make people jealous. So we could even up the contrast and make those areas, so just to see, so you can see what this looks like. So some areas are super frosty. Maybe 0.3, we'll get a little crazy. There you go. It's those little details that'll make it look more realistic in the end. That's the glass material. Let's make the fluid, whether it be HP, stamina, mana, urine, whatever. Let's make it. To do that, you're thinking, oh, we need to do a fluid simulation, and you could, and then you can actually move the bottle and stuff like that, and it'll be splashes. But I'm going to do a stupider method. We're just going to duplicate the bottle. This one's going to be fluid. So this is if you wanted to actually model the fluid, not simulate it. And before we do that, let's call this material glass, and let's give our fluid a new material. So we're going to decouple it, and we're going to call this fluid. For the fluid material, I guess we could just do either a glass BSDF again, but this time mess with the settings for like water settings, or just use principled BSDF. I don't know which one's better for this, but whatever. Let's see. Let's disable Erlenmeyer so we can actually see this. This is our fluid. It's going to be inside of here. Of course, we don't want the whole thing to be full. So just a trick to make a realistic fluid is you could just like either like cut here, and we can have like the fluid go up to here, or you could even like do a boolean. It's kind of dependent on the orientation of your bottle, but for now, let's just keep it simple. So I'm going to add a loop cut there. I'm going to go to wireframe. I'm going to take everything below that, or above that, I guess, and delete it. So now we kind of have this base right here. And this is one thing that I guess we do not want solidify modifier for. So again, the reason we kept this flask around, and I said, oh, we need to solidify outwards, not inwards, is because we're going to use this mesh again to make the fluid. So we need the interior to be the same. So I clicked F to fill, which in solid view looks like that. So I just filled in the top. Let's see what this looks like. So this is our fluid. We enable the flask, and now it looks like one's inside another. Of course, it might look a bit strange at certain angles because cycle, I don't know, dude. Point is, to fix these glitches, kind of general idea, set origin to volume. So this time we can like scale from the center. And just scale it by something very tiny, or something very close to 1, so it's barely altered, like 0.99. And just that little thing is going to make it render much, much better. So it's kind of like inside the bottle, but just barely, right? There's just a tiny film of air, and in fact we could do 0.99 again, or we could just undo, and this time scale by like 0.97 or something, just so that there's definitely no intersection. So again, one's kind of nestled inside another, and the thing about this is at any point we could kind of like add a loop cut here and like bring it down, etc., or just slide down the face. For the material, I guess if you want to use a principled BSDF, we pick a color, let it be red, dependent on your potion, let it be transmissive, so it's kind of like fluidy. It's looking a bit like cough syrup, but kind of like very mystical, very cool cough syrup. And what else could we do? We could also change around the index of refraction. Assuming that this is water-based, the index of refraction of water is like 1.3, I believe. So this will make it act more like water. Again, the number you pick here is very important. So 0, you get like, you know, black abyss, and then you can get metallic-y looking things if you go high. 1.3, that's a good number. If you want to be a bit controversial, so this isn't technically accurate, but it is very mystical. I'm going to set up the color for the RGB, right? So I've made an RGB node connected to the base color. Now here's the controversial part. We could choose this to also be the emission color so that the fluid actually glows as if it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's an actual healing potion and it glows, and we can make that emission less strong. Now that's kind of a controversial take. You might not want to do this because it's very not realistic. So this is before, this is after. Maybe do this with caution or make it very, very not that strong. I'm gonna go without it, but just so you know, that option exists. Maybe I'll do it in the final renders, who knows. Other than that, you can make it more reflective, but of course it's gonna make it look weird, so that it kind of depends on you. I guess physically accurate, unless there's a lot of stuff hanging in the atmosphere of the water, you make it roughness 0 or something close to it, but I don't want to go down there, okay? So there we go, we have glass. We have fluid, we know how to make any kind of fluid. Again, we just take this mesh and either boolean or cuts and do a fill at the top, right? But I guess one thing that's missing, two things that's missing, I guess, is we could do the cork and we could also do bubbles. Not sure if we're gonna do bubbles, because I don't know. Who has the time for that? But one thing we're absolutely going to do is we are going to do the cork, okay? So how do you make a cork? Super simple. You model again, it feels so good to model. This one could have less geometry because it's smaller. Boom. We're going to scale this. Shift Z. Whoops, I keep doing that. I guess that's the first time I did it, but I have a feeling it's going to keep happening. Scale. Actually, make sure proportional editing is off. Scale. Shift Z until it's the thickness. It just happened again. Until it's the thickness of the flask, and it's probably better to see this in wireframe mode. Okay, cool. We're going to bring this up. We're going to edit mode, scale on the Z-axis. And I haven't seen a cork in a long time, but I think it's kind of like this. Most of it's hanging out just like that. And then what you want to do is you want to select the interior face. This one's scaled down a bit, so it's not like a perfect cylinder. It kind of tapers, which is the point of a cork. That's why they work. And this one is bigger. And then what you do is you take both of these, and we are going to bevel. Just like last time, Control B, and this just gives it that nice shape to it. There you go. So that's going to be our cork. Let's see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. Just like last time, first of all, shade smooth, but just like last time, we could like scale it by like 0.99, just so it's kind of a bit more in there, in case it wasn't already. That's a good looking cork. Let's give it a quick material. Easy. Make a material. Call it cork. I guess a cork is just kind of like a very holy, not a spiritual sense, but a very holy, porous kind of material. So we need a lot of circles. Voronoi texture is the way to get that. If you look at the distance function, it basically calculates a lot of points and measures the distance from them. And that gives circles, really. But if we take this, we color ramp it, and first of all, it's increase this number so there's more of those. When we color ramp it, we can kind of make the contrast higher, which kind of defines our circles more nicely. We could also choose colors here, so corks are kind of like orangey yellow, maybe a bit darker. Take that, copy it over to the black, so anytime it goes to the circle-y part, it can just be like a darker shade of the same thing, maybe a bit redder, less saturated, darker, something like that. Hook it up to the base color, hook it up here. It's a good start, kind of looks like a leopard print, I mean, maybe a cougar would wear this on something, but it's weird to the point. To make it look good, first of all, roughness, bump it up. It should be near 1 because this thing's incredibly rough. And second of all, before we fix the color, bump node, this is kind of like the silver bullet. We're going to use the same kind of thing, regardless of the fact that this is color. We're going to use this as a height map to generate normals, and boom, it's looking like there's actual like shading and like depth and stuff going on here. First of all, let's fix the color. I'm thinking dip the saturation and also mess with the hue a bit. It's just kind of like the wrong shade of whatever it's supposed to be. I feel like that's closer, and we can make it have more porous-y kind of situation here. I think that looks pretty good. You could play with it a bit more, but I think that's about as good as we're going to get it. We could make the strength of the normal a little less intense. And okay, cool. So I think generally the form of this is fine. We got good material, we got good shapes. Just so you know, if you're curious, you can make a bunch of bubbles here. I don't know if we're going to get too much into it, but what you do is you take your fluid, which is kind of weird that we can kind of isolate it. But you take your fluid and then you set up a particle system in it. We'll see. We'll try messing around with it. We add a particle system. Might be easier to see in solid mode. Although the thing is, we were going to have it like spawn from the volume. have it emit on the first and last frame, so it's not like, you know, adding more particles throughout time, but all the frames that will ever exist there, and they're going to exist for like 200 frames or 250, however long. So in other words, all the particles are already there, and we can choose how many that's going to be. What we want to do with these is in the source, we want to say emit them in the volume, so like at different spots inside of here. And then I guess the last thing is for each of these particles, we want to map it to a bubble. To do that, we are going to make a kind of like reference bubble. And I think what's going to happen here is it's going to work, but it's not going to be very visible, but at least it's worth trying. So this is going to be our bubble. So let's just call it that. What we're going to do with this is for this in the render, I think it's render, we're going to render as, in other words, for every particle, we're going to have it mapped to an object, which object? Our bubble. Boop. So now you can kind of see, again, this thing's, I guess this would be an argument to make it like less rough, so you can kind of see through it a bit more. You can see there's a bunch of spheres packed in here. One thing we could do is make them like less, like 25, so there's only like a few of them. And in other words, basically, if we did something to these spheres to make it look like more like a bubble material, it will translate to all of these. Okay, cool. How do we do this? We're going to make a material for the bubble. Now, I guess if we were going with the physically accurate theme, maybe a quick trick would be transmission. This will make it kind of like glassy. And I guess the second thing you want to do is make it kind of have the IOR. Now, bubbles are kind of weird where they have this kind of like thin film effect. So really, they're supposed to be these kind of like solidified things. Maybe we'll skip out on that part. But it has like an IOR of 1 on the inside and then something slightly higher on the outside, like where there's actual soap. But like 1.1, something close to 1. Generally gives you bubbles. So again, if you wanted to do this physically accurately, and let's actually take down the roughness as well, and shade some. If you wanted to do this physically accurately, you'd add in a solidify modifier just so it has like a tiny bit of thin film. You want to be able to like see through it and stuff like that. I guess that's what you. I guess there's no reason not to add a solidify modifier. That should carry out to every particle, assuming that it actually uses the particle stack modifier stack is what I mean. I don't know if this is what it's referring to, but just in case. Generally, this is a good way to get bubbles, and a problem you might experience, I don't think we're experiencing it here, but one of your bubbles might be sticking out, and in that case, you could zoom out. You can either kind of do some tricks with, does this scale affect that scale? It does. You can choose the size of the bubble. That's one way to fix it. Or you could just kind of keep changing the seed here to get different bubble positions. So you can see some of them are sticking out. I'm just going to keep generating until they don't. I guess this one's sticking out. And I guess another thing is we do have the glass to kind of camouflage this. But yeah, I don't have a simple solution minus using like volume shaders and stuff like that. So now you can see our like fluid has some bubbles suspended in it. I'm just going to bump up the roughness again. And for the bubble material, even though this is closer to physically accurate, we'll just make it close to 1.3 so it's less noticeable. We're also going to make it rougher. I don't know. Or I guess one other thing you could do to make it look more realistic is the alpha, and this is just kind of like the transparency of the thing, so you can see it's actually like going away over here. We can make it like 50% transparent, and I'm thinking, now that I'm seeing this whole thing like as one entity, I want more bubbles. Let's bump that up. Hopefully none of them stick out. Cool. We could hide this, and that should keep our bubbles here, at least on render. If I was to change anything about this, I think I would make the cork. Again, I haven't seen like a cork in a long time. I'd make it a bit smaller, like that. And yeah. Now, one thing to consider, just so you know, you might want to, since all these parts are kind of like separate, but they're supposed to be together, but maybe you want the cork to be separate so you can remove it. You might want to parent these all together, or even more simply, you just, you know, shift click a bunch of these and use the join command. Point is, if you were to rotate this whole system around, let's say, the 3D cursor, if you were to rotate this whole system, again, the fluid doesn't really react to it, so it should be like level over here. You could either, again, update it by saying, I know the mesh is going to be this way, so I'm just going to do a boolean on this, so instead of like doing the loop cut, you make the fluid oriented this way. Or again, you could do a fluid simulation, or even more crazy, you could do all of this in nodes and have it react to the orientation, but that's some crazy stuff. So let's not talk about that for now. Kind of like final thing is you just kind of want to set up your scene. So you just want to kind of flicker through HDRIs. I mean, I think the one we had to begin with was pretty good looking. But really, this is just going to change the look of the glass, since that's kind of like the main thing going on here. I'm just going to go back to the original, whichever one that was. I think it was the power plant. There you go. It kind of has this kind of very dark, sinister HP potions look to it. By the way, last thing, it's obvious, but I didn't mention it. The color, whether you have it just driving base color or also mission, you could have it be, just by changing the color, stamina. You could have it be mana, stuff like that. So super easy, super easy. And you could also change the shape of the bottle into flask. It already is a flask, like a boiling flask or like a tube, like a testing tube for a tiny little potion. But yeah, I think that's how you make potions. I think that was a pretty coherent tutorial, pretty photorealistic. You could either set this down on a plane. I mean, I guess if you want this to be photorealistic, you need to set the scale so that it's not like 2 meters tall and all that, but whatever. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, do consider the Patreon. Why would you consider the Patreon? Why would you just watch a free tutorial and then go to Patreon? It makes no sense. Well, Patreon has exclusive tutorials. First of all, these are tutorials that I do not put on the default Cube or CG Matter channel, so maybe you'll find something there. There's quite a bit of a backlog now since I've been doing it for months. But we have exclusive tutorials. We have blend files, so you better bet your bippy, as my 6th grade teacher would say, better bet your bippy that this blend file and maybe hundreds, maybe 800, there's a lot of blend files on there that you can pick up for various projects. Behind the scenes access, Discord access, well, what else is there? There's sometimes there's early releases. There's a name for that, early content. I forget what that's called, dude. Either way, that happens sometimes if it's not like an advertised video. I can upload it early and stuff like that. Early access. Maybe I already said that. All this stuff exists on the Patreon, and it is a great way to keep CG Matter and Default Cube running, but only get Patreon if you want those benefits that I talked about. I want to thank all 550 to 560, maybe 570 now. I don't know. I want to thank all the patrons that have joined and stick around. I thank you. I credit you at the end of the tutorials because it's kind of like a big deal. So thank you. Now you know how to make potions. Let's get rid of this. It's ruining the vibe. Now you know how to make some potions. And with that, I'll bid you adieu. See ya.
What, you thought I only had 100 blender tips left? You underestimate me. Tip number 1. Everybody already knows that if you select an edge in edit mode, you can bevel it with Control B. In fact, you can also open up this panel down here to change the segments and things like that, but we all know that. But did you know that if you check this box that says Custom Profile, you've got all these presets that you can choose from to make some really cool looking bevels. If you up the segments, it becomes really apparent the power of all of this. You could make molding, you could make stairs, and so much more. In fact, you can even create your own custom bevel profiles. I'm sure that you can create some abominations with this, and well, that's what we care about, so let's move on. Hey, Daniel from the future here, just gotta leave a quick disclaimer to make sure that you're mentally prepared for this one. Alright, good luck out there. Sometimes your objects really need a UV map. I mean, look at all these seams. But I don't want to make a UV map, so here's what we're going to do instead. You're going to go into the node editor, add a vector mapping node, add a input texture coordinate node, drag this object output into vector, this vector output into vector on the texture, and immediately that looks much worse, because it's on flat projection, and so it's only projecting it from one side, which I'm presuming to be the top, and it's causing stretching on all the other sides, and we don't want that. But if we change it to box projection, it's going to try and project the texture from all 6 sides, which is awesome, but it's still going to cause some seams here and there. But the real tip here is this magic slider called blend. Just watch what happens. Try to identify with your eye some of these seams, and then watch what happens when I slide this blend slider. Did you know this feature was available? It just blended everything together seamlessly, and that was probably the most convenient thing I've ever done. So if you're looking to get some quick texture mapping on without any cutoffs or repeating patterns, there you go. Tip number 3, you've heard people say that you should be naming your objects, but I don't know a single person who has time for that, so I decided to come up with a way to make it less of a hassle. And it turns out, if you press the F2 key, a box will pop up, allowing you to just type in the name. Most of us know at this point that if you take a cube and add a subdivision surface a bunch of times, but as some will adamantly tell you, it's not actually exactly a sphere. To fix that, all you have to do is add a cast modifier and make sure that it's set to sphere. Now it's nearly impossible to tell the difference except for the topology, which of course is all quads. Tip number 5, if you're trying to create a complex curve and you're having problems with this nonsense, you can actually enable this tool right here and just draw the entire thing with the grease pencil, and it'll maintain basically the entire form that you created, just smoothing it out a little bit. Now, I'm sure this would be really easy to create some tomfoolery with, oh, who put that there? We've all been there. You're in the middle of a complex operation in edit mode. Everything is going great. And then all of a sudden you accidentally select a vertex and it all just disappears. Your life, your family, gone before your eyes. But the good news is if you press the F9 key, it'll all come back and you can continue editing as you were. I'm actually shocked that more people don't talk about this. It's such a lifesaver. Tip number 7, if you press Control Tab on the timeline, it becomes a graph editor. How convenient. Don't you love when you can open a blend file and just expect that all the textures will still be there? Well, apparently in my early days of Blender, I didn't like that, and now look what happened to all my old saves. To make sure that doesn't happen to you if all your textures go away, under File External Data, there's an option called Pack All into .blend, and that'll add in all the fonts and all the images into your blend file itself so that when you open it, it'll all still be there. There's also an option to automatically do this. I can see it being really convenient, especially if you want to upload a blend file for someone to look at and things like that. Walk navigation is pretty cool. It allows you to move around your scene from a first-person perspective. To enable it, all you have to do is either go into your search menu and type in walk, or you can press Shift tilde and that'll do the exact same thing. So that's the tip, the shortcut. Also, doesn't this scene look cool? Well, we're going to make it later in the video, so stick around. Tip number 10, if you've got unused mesh data or images in some of your blend files, you can go to File, Clean Up, and Purge All. And as you can see in the tooltip, clear all orphan data blocks without any users from the file. Click that and you may see your memory usage go down. Tip number 11, there's a whole host of options for you to check out. For vertices, if you press Ctrl V. For edges, if you press Ctrl E. And for faces, all you have to do is press Ctrl F. One of my favorites from there is that if you press Ctrl F while having faces selected, one of the options for you is wireframe. You can click that and it'll turn whatever you had selected into a wireframe. And you get this box down here where you can choose the thickness and the offset and all of that. It's a really cool tool, especially if you don't want the whole model to be a wireframe, you just need a little bit of it. Another one of those cool features is under Control F, you can either shade something smooth or shade something flat. Now that's really convenient because otherwise you have to go into object mode, go into object, shade smooth. And that doesn't give you the option to just choose select faces and things like that. Lastly, for the Control F menu, if you press Control F, one of the options is Beautify Faces. As you can see, that just makes the topology for things usually much nicer. This next one is a website. It's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. If you want to use Face Builder but you don't want to take pictures of people, thispersondoesnotexist.com will use artificial intelligence to randomly generate faces. We may or may not be living in a Black Mirror episode, but until we find out, this is a great source for face textures. I talked about this one in my last video, but it's just so good. I have to talk about it again. It's called Lily's Surface Scraper. It's an add-on. You can find all the links in my 100 add-ons video. Essentially what it does, again, hold on to your chair real fast. They got all these websites up for you on the side, and it's a bunch of texture websites. So you go in and then you pick a website that looks real nice to you. Okay, that one looks good to me. So I'm gonna go there, copy the link, and then I'm gonna go back to Blender, and it's actually even faster than I showed on the last time. I just have to click this button that says import from clipboard. I have to choose the texture resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, it takes the URL you provide and generates an entire material. It happened again. There's a program called Pepakura that allows you to make 3D models into paper models. I've heard it's very good, but it costs like $40. But there is a free add-on for Blender called Export Paper Model. Here you can see something that I did with that. Are you tired of having to do all this trickery just to move the pivot point around? Well, at the top of the 3D viewport, there's an Options button. If you click that and then affect origins, then you can use your transform keys to affect the origin. In fact, you can turn on the move gizmos and all of that, and then you can move it without needing to even use the transform keys at all. Now this next one is a shortcut I've been using a lot in the node editor. If you press Control and right click and drag, it'll create this line that will cut any node connection that it goes through. It's actually really fast, and so if you're just doing things, see how fast that was? And you'll end up playing Fruit Ninja with node connections, but in the end of the day, it's worth it all. It saves me a lot of time from having to do all this pin sniping, I guess. Definitely give it a try. Now, we're going to get a little more philosophical with this one. So, a lot of beginners sometimes have problems understanding UVs and the seams and all that. Basically, you know that UVs are laying out an object as if it were flat on a table, and then the seams are kind of like incisions, like where you would cut. So something I would suggest as a beginner exercise for kind of figuring this out is look at an object you have on your desk and then figure out how you would make the cuts to lay that out completely flat on a desk. So for instance, I have a water bottle, I'll probably chop off this bottom part, cut down the middle, and then separate the curved parts so that there's no bending or stretching when we try to lay it flat on the table. It's just kind of a way for you to visualize how UVs work, and I know other people might already think of it like that, but just for the beginners in the audience, that's kind of the way that I figured UVs out, and so I just wanted to share that with you. Speaking of UVs, if you press T while you're in the UV editor, you've got a whole bunch of brushes in here, and you can actually sculpt UVs. Now, I would imagine this would be useful, especially on really high-res objects, and you need to just make some adjustments to the texture mapping. But tip number 2, do be aware that stretching does occur quite often in this process, so I would recommend going in, adding a checker texture that you can then preview and see where all the stretching is, or you can go into your UV editor and then under the end panel in there, you can check this box under overlays that says stretching, and then it'll show you where all the stretching is. The blue means there's no stretching, and I believe red is the worst. Now these next few tips are about the add-on Node Wrangler. Now everyone already knows that you've got this viewer node by pressing Control-Shift-Click, but in fact Node Wrangler does a whole lot more than that, and so I figured we'd have ourselves a bit of a Node Wrangler bonus around here. The first thing I want to talk about is Shift-S. That's a Node Wrangler function that allows you to hover over a node, press Shift-S, and then just switch it to a different kind of node, so you don't want to have to redo all the texture stuff. I mean, there it is. You just switch it to like a brick texture or something. Tip number 24, if you don't want to be pin sniping to get all these outputs into the right inputs, all you have to do is hold Alt and then just right-click drag from one node to the other, and it'll lazy connect it. That's what they call it. You can be all over the place. It's super easy to do it that way. And adding on to that one, if you hold Shift, Alt, right-click, and drag, you can do the same thing except with the menu. So I could bring it from the color to, I don't know, the roughness or something like that. Something else that Node Wrangler allows you to do is Control-Shift, right-click, drag, and it'll create a mix shader right in the center. And then of course you can do with that whatever you want. I've been using this one a whole lot recently. Node Wrangler allows you to add a texture setup by pressing Control-T. It does everything you could need for a texture. Now all you have to do is go find one. But let's say you do want the textures. Well, with the principled BSDF, Node Wrangler allows you to do Control-Shift-T, and then go find a folder with all your textures for a chill in it. Select all the textures, usually with click and shift-click. Click Principled Texture Setup, and it does the whole thing for you. And this time it adds displacement, unlike the surface scraper, and the mapping nodes are a nice plus. So if you need an advanced material, this could be a better option, but it is going to be that millisecond less convenient. Anyways, clearly it's a very helpful tool as a time saver, so. But now we've got some nodes that are unused up here. Now we could do it the hard way, pan over, select them all, and delete them, but if it was more complex, that would just be ridiculous. So instead you can press Alt-X and click, and it'll delete all of the unused nodes in your setup. Have you ever thought, maybe I should organize my node tree? I know, me neither. But Node Wrangler has you covered. If you select all the nodes you want organized, and then you press Shift equals, it'll lay them all out real nice for you. And this works especially well if you have frames like this, because then you can just look and see the names of your groups, and it's just really nice. Oh, also, you don't have to do it with everything, you can just do it with a little part. Let's say this whole thing got out of whack. Well, you could select just those, Shift equals, and it'll organize them for you in what appears to be a vertical fashion. It even works with reroute nodes. Speaking of reroute nodes, did you know that Node Wrangler allows you to add reroute nodes to either all outputs, loose outputs, or linked outputs just by pressing /? It's pretty incredible. I wonder how the OCD people are going to take the news. I'm not one, I was just one. Tip 31, don't you hate it when you have to go through and just mass edit nodes one at a time? Really, it's just a putrid experience. So what you can do is change one, select all the rest, and then press Shift-C, settings from active. Keep in mind that this is also going to affect the actual image itself in the case of an image texture node. So just make sure for maximum efficiency that you do this before you put the images in. And if there's any other nodes that you've used repeatedly, this would be indispensable for that. So you know mixed nodes, right? You connect two different nodes and then they're never in the right spot, so you switch them like that. Well, it turns out you don't have to click at all. You can just press Alt-S and it'll switch them for you. It's very convenient. Speaking of mixed nodes, oh boy. If you select two shaders and press Ctrl-0 on the numpad, it'll create a mix shader. Ctrl+ will add an add shader, and with color data such as image textures, you can press Ctrl- to add a subtract, and a Ctrl* to add a multiply. Ctrl/ will add a divide, Shift-Control- will add a greater than, Shift-Control- will add a less than. Shift-Alt-D will detach all outputs, And
Então, no jogo
finally,
do
once you
Counter-Strike,
forget
quando
everything I
aparecem
just
aqueles
said,
pontinhos pequeninos,
you can
faz
always
conta
press
que
the Shift W
é
key
pontinho
to
pequenino
remember
bem lá
all of
longe.
these keystrokes whenever you have
Eles
Node Wrangler
tinham bué da
enabled.
jeito e
Now this
apontavam
next one is
rapidamente
about
e
paid add-ons.
disparavam e
Sometimes the
acertavam.
developers will put up the source code for their paid add-ons on GitHub, so if you
Mas
search the
estas
name of the
coisas
paid
devem ser
add-on
estudadas
plus
mesmo
Blender
com
GitHub,
os jogadores
you may be able to find that.
profissionais de
Oftentimes they'll
Counter-Strike.
offer a free demo version of
Nele,
their add-on
nisso
for
vê-se bem
people
a
to use.
diferença de pessoa para
Not
pessoa.
always,
Quem
but
jogava aqui.
sometimes I've managed to find it. Specifically, Flip Fluids offers a demo version,
Não sei se
and in some
já
cases,
fizeram
you may
testes a
be
esses
able to
jogadores
compile the
todos
source code
profissionais do
yourself.
Counter-Strike
Obviously, I would
mesmo.
encourage you to support
Qual é a
the
graduação
creator
que
of
eles
the
têm?
add-on, as its
Alguns a
existence
gente
is
tem
improving the value of Blender as a
Quanto
whole,
a jogar.
increasing the likelihood that it will be
Mas há
developed
outros
into
não.
something
E-
even bigger than it already
ver-
is. But it may
comparar
be
as
worth
graduações entre
investigating
eles.
if the
Aqueles
price
que
tag
são
is
melhores
something that is going to be a problem,
são-
and always you can search for free
têm-
alternatives. Let's talk about some good old interface shortcuts. Did you know that to open and collapse menus, all you have to do is just
Tem lentes
click and drag on
positivas ou
them,
negativas.
and they'll open just like this.
Se calhar,
I think it's actually, I think it's
alguns até
pretty
têm
satisfying. You
estigmatismo e
just
conseguem,
read it.
tipo,
Speaking
sei lá,
of the outliner, wait, we weren't
será que
speaking of the
aquele pequeno
outliner. Hey, did you
estigmatismo
know
até
that in the
ajuda quando
outliner
o
there's
gajo,
this button up here where you can set different
aponta
restriction
a
types
arma
such as
bué
selectable,
da
so I
rápido
could
para
turn
ponto.
this cube
Parece
off
que
from
aquilo
being selectable
faz ali azimuth
and now I can't
e
select
acerta
it.
em
And that's
cheio.
awesome. And there's a lot of different restriction
Mas-
toggles. You should just look through them to see if any of them will be helpful to you. Speaking of the outliner, if you press the plus or minus keys on the numpad, it'll open and close outliner levels. It's actually pretty cool. Simulations, they're awesome. We live in one. Just kidding. Maybe. Do you want to make a rigid body simulation? Here's all you have to know. You can select an object that you want the rigid body to crash against, go under Object, Rigid Body, add Passive,
Oi.
and then use the actual object, go to Object, Rigid Body, add Active. And now if you start playing it, boom, rigid body. And if you go into the physics tab on either of the objects, you can go under all the settings and make different things happen. I could make it really bouncy, for example. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, that's beautiful. This next one's called randomized transform. So I'm going to add an array here. I'm just going to add a little offset. Offset apply, array offset apply. I'm going to go into edit mode, press P, and separate by loose
Já vai-
parts. Now we have a whole bunch of
aqui
different objects. Now I'm going to
esta
go into
parte.
randomized transform. And here you can do a whole bunch of things to randomize the scale, rotation, and positioning of your objects. I did make a mistake though because, well, the origin for all these objects. I'm going to make sure to go into the search menu, press set origin, origin to geometry so they all have their individual origins. And then I'm going to type in randomized transform just to give you a look of what this does. You can set all the parameters and basically you can randomize the positioning, rotation, and scale. So do yourself a favor and try random things with every single grid of objects you can come in contact with. By the way, what I just did is turn on orthographic random and just, wow, that's actually super cool. So tip number 41 is to use more text. I mean, come on, you don't have to use the default font. You can do all sorts of cool things with it. I mean, just from a quick Google search, I found 3 free font websites, 1001 free fonts, Duff Font, and Urban Font. The one that I've used the most so far is Duff Font. Most of them have just worked for me so far. And you can find some real neat ones like this. That's adorable. You can even put it on a curve. Just select the text object, go under Font, Transform, hit this eyedropper, text on curve, select the curve, and well, there you got it. You can just type whatever you want around that curve. Combine this with the other tip, you can make something pretty funky. And tip 44, what is this? You can change the interface font? Let me tell you, this is changing Blender forever. All you gotta do is go up to Edit, Preferences, Interface, Text Rendering, and then choose your interface
Vai
font.
entender.
It's really that simple.
No dia em que conseguirem fazer isto
I'm
que eu
already
estou a
having
dizer,
way too much fun with this. Anyways, if you
A
do
Google
happen to
e a
be typing
Microsoft.
text, you can press Control
Olha, se eu
Backspace and then it'll
dissesse-
give you
se eu
a lot of
dissesse agora,
options for
ou tu-
deleting. You can either delete
Ei,
the previous
descobri uma
word, the next
maneira
word, or
onde
entire
consigo
paragraphs at a
simular,
time. Either
fazer
way,
a
it's much faster
simulação
than
de
just the
lentos,
normal backspace.
tal e qual.
Now this one is
Agora
really
os
nice
jogos
because all of
táticos,
these shortcuts and everything,
Tem
it's
bué da
kind of hard to
física,
remember all of them.
que aquilo
But if you press the
dizem que
Q
é
key,
quase a mesma
it'll
coisa
open up a
conduzir
quick
carro
favorites
normal.
menu. So if you want something to be
Acontece
in that quick
exatamente a
favorites
mesma
menu,
coisa.
all you have to do, like let's say it's make links materials, all you have to do is right click on that, add to quick favorites. Then next time you
Pois,
click
mas não-
Q,
mas não
you'll
sei
find
como
it
é
right there. And if
fazer
you want to
isso.
remove it, just right click and remove from quick favorites. If you press Alt Z, it'll enable X-ray so you can see what's inside and what's behind your objects. The F4 key will bring up the file context menu. It's like the file menu, except it's right at your fingertips. So you could create those new general files. I was just messing around with it and I figured out that it's probably the fastest way to open preferences if you can get the keystroke down. It's F4P, just boom. It's things like this that make me wonder, what
Pois.
if someone actually went and memorized all of this stuff? They would be flying so fast, no one would be able to keep up. They would just be typing the model into existence. Hey, that's actually a good video idea. Here's a fun one. If you press Control and page up or page down, you can switch through all these workspaces along the top. Keep in mind, you can create your own workspaces at any time. And finally, since it's tip number 50, which is a nice number, I can't stress enough, keep saving your files over and over again. Whenever you're working on something important, save up here. Or you can just press Control S. It's nice when you have a file that you're working on already, because then you can just Control S, Control S. It's super simple. Your hands are probably resting there anyways. One day you won't regret it, I promise you. Ever wondered how to switch between cameras in an animation? Well, I've got the answer for you. You're gonna start at one spot, press M to add a marker. Then you're gonna have that camera selected that you wanna start with, and press Control B while hovering over that marker. Next, you're gonna move forward to whenever you need to switch to the other camera, select it, add a marker with M, and then press Control B to attach that camera to that marker. Now if you press 0 on the numpad to go into camera view, and you start playing the animation, you'll see that it does indeed cross over to the other camera, so you can use that to make multiple shots, or whatever else you were planning. You ever wondered how to make cel-shaded renders like this? Well, there's a way to do it in Eevee that's actually really easy. For tip number 52, we're going to be learning about this node right here, shader to RGB, and it can do some pretty cool things like produce renders like this. So to start, add your base shader. In this case, we'll use a principled BSDF. Next, I'm going to add in our converter, shader to RGB, and what's going to do is take that shader value and then turn it into a color output. How cool is that? That means that you can use any kind of color node to alter the shader. In this case, let's use a color ramp. Immediately we can begin to adjust how the light works on this object, which is really cool. But if we change the interpolation to constant, this is where you're going to start to get that cool cell shader look. Frames of color to adjust the shading as you'd like. What I did in the other model is I used purple, orange, and tinted yellow. And I found that it worked really well in this case. And it's not baked or anything, so you can, of course, still rotate things freely around, and it will just kind of work, and that's the beauty of it. Tip number 53, BSDF stands for Bidirectional Scattering Distribution Function. The more you know, am I right? Number 54 is a website called SolarSystemScope.com. They've got a whole bunch of really nice planet textures that I've used multiple times for renders. The level of quality is just extreme here, and if you ever make space stuff, you definitely should check this out. Speaking of space stuff, NASA has 3D models too, link in description. It has a whole bunch of space-related things like the Apollo 14 landing site. In edit mode, if you go into the overlays, you can enable edge length, edge angle, face area, face angle, all that kind of measurement. But if you have those on, and you go out of edit mode, it all disappears. But there's an add-on called Measure It, which allows you to make all sorts of measurements. And it has an extensive list of tools, and the good thing is that if you exit out of edit mode, it'll still keep all the measurements there if you want. Now, some of you might know about this, but the beginners definitely might not, and so I just want to make sure that people are aware of this. If you accidentally close a file without saving, even though you should always be saving, you can go up to File and Recover, and under there you'll find Autosave. And if you find the most recent one, you might be able to recover some of the work that you lost before you quit without saving. But always be saving. Just Control S. Just keep pressing Control S, okay? Ant Landscapes was a fan favorite from the other video. Once enabled, you can go into the Create tab, press Landscape, and it'll just generate a whole landscape for you. And you can, of course, mess with all the settings and everything. There are so many different types of presets. Something new that I figured out after that video is that you can actually make it a sphere, and then you can make like a cool globe or something, maybe for an asteroid or a moon. It is just incredible to me what all of the settings can do, and it's completely free. Default with Blender. Alright, this one's more about tutorials in general. Be careful following any tutorials or tips that involve Blender's file system, such as startup files and things like that. It's easy to make a mistake, and sometimes that can corrupt the system. If that ever does happen to you, don't really worry about it, because you can always just repair the install, but just be cautious doing things like that, alright? If you press backspace on a set of parameters, it'll reset them. However, if you only want to reset one, such as the X or maybe the X and the Y, you can hold Control and backspace, and it'll just reset that one. And alternatively, if that one doesn't work, you can right-click on any parameter and choose Reset to Default Values, and that one's a good one to fall back on. This next one is a website. It's called Sheepit Render Farm. It's essentially an entirely free render farm based on using the computers of people in the community. Like this guy has rendered 41,000 frames. It's just incredible. So if you're in a hard spot where your hardware doesn't render very well, Sheepit is an option to consider, and if you do end up finding it really useful, you can always donate or lend your computing power. The bisect tool allows you to click, drag and bisect an object just like that. And it's really cool because you can
Eu
check
acho
these
que
boxes to
para
like
fazer
clear
esse
one
tal
side or
efeito
clear the other
é
side.
preciso que
It's a cool way to get a
estas
cross-section of
curvaturas que eu
something,
fiz aqui,
and just a nifty thing to keep in mind. If you need to add quick
como é que é dizer?
subdivisions, you can use the
Isto
Control
tem que
1,
fazer estas
2, 3,
continhas
4, and
aqui.
5 keys
Isto tem que ganhar
to add a
densidade
subdivision
aqui.
service modifier and change the subdivision depth according
por
to the
exemplo,
number that you press. Did I
isto vai
mention you should
deste
be
ponto
saving
aqui
all the time?
até
Control
esta
S.
parte ali.
Yes, I did. And also, you can go into preferences, and you
Isto
can
tem
go
que
down
ganhar
to
a
save and
densidade
load,
aqui dentro
and you
para
can
fazer
change
o
the
tal efeito que eu
interval of
digo.
auto-saving. The minimum
Pois
seems to be
aí,
1
eu tenho
minute,
a
but if
certeza
you
que
tend to
o
be kind
jogador
of
que estiver
erratic
aqui vai
with your
ver uma
saving
coisa
methods,
e o outro
that could be
jogador vai ver
useful.
outra coisa.
Hiding objects is pretty useful. If you don't want to go in and individually hide things, there's a few things that you can do. One, select the object that you don't want to be hidden, press Shift H, and it'll hide everything except
aqui a mesma
what you have
coisa.
selected. Or if you have nothing selected, it'll just
Isto
hide
tem que
everything.
ver
When you're
esta
ready for everything to be
densidade
back,
aqui
you can
do
just
dedo.
press Alt H and everything will come back. Alternatively, if you want to isolate an object, you can just press the slash key and it will hide everything else and zoom
tenho
in
que
for
fazer
that,
as
on that
contas
object for you.
desde este
And then to
ponto
get back
até
out of
aqui ao
the
meio,
isolation mode, just press that
vai
key
uma
again.
distância.
Video editing
E
tip?
aqui,
What is going on?
na
Actually, it's
beira,
not a video editing tip.
desde este ponto
It's
até aqui
actually
vai
an
outra
animation
distância.
tip,
Ele
believe it
tem
or not.
Os
If you need to
computadores têm
sync
que
your
fazer as
animations
contas
to
disto
audio,
e
it could be
fazer a
useful if you could
densidade
kind of
disto quando
see
se
where
olha
the
ali para o
drops
fundo.
are on the audio, right? Well, if you have your audio
Tem que
selected,
saber,
there's a
dentro
checkbox over here that
deste-
says display
isto está
waveform,
aqui,
and if you
existe
check that, it'll generate the
volume.
waveform for the audio so you can see when the beats are.
Então,
And that'll really
depois
help
tem
you
que
when you're
fazer
creating
aí,
animations. Trust
como é
me.
que é
You
dizer,
could even
tem que
condense it
fazer
like this and just
a
imagine
imagem
how useful
distorcer
this would be.
e cenas assim, ficar fosco e nítido.
Is
Mas
your
também
viewport
depende,
laggy because of
não
a
é,
ton of
da-
objects
da
or something
posição
like
que eu
that?
estou.
Well, did you know
Convém
that
ter
the viewport is actually using
mais ou menos,
anti-aliasing?
se calhar,
And you can
30
adjust the resolution of that.
Faz conta que
And
tinha,
you might be able to get some
estava a
frames
30
back if you do so.
centímetros do ecrã.
If
Pronto.
you sculpt a lot, I'm about to save you so much time, it's not even funny. So if you're sculpting and you want to open up like different views and perspectives of your object, all you have to do is press Ctrl-Alt-Q. It's that easy. And now if you go in and start sculpting on something, you'll be able to see it in all the other viewports as well, so that you can see all angles, and well, you know why you need that. CC0 Textures is a website I found myself using quite a lot recently. It's available with Lily's Surface Scraper, and I would say that it's probably my favorite website out of the 4 that they include there. They allow you to preview materials on objects before you download them, and this is really just one way to make that whole process more seamless. This one here's a recommendation I nabbed from Blender Guru. It's called Neat Video, and it's what he suggests you use to get rid of noise in video. As you know, noise can kind of change per frame, and so it looks funky if you try to put all those frames together. Denoisers are getting better and better, but they still leave changing patterns, and it is noticeable. So Neat Video for Premiere or After Effects is something that I didn't even know existed that handles noise pretty well despite the old looking website. So you know that cool look where they do this? Well, basically the way to do that is go up to this arrow up here and change the color from material to random. It's super easy. Video textures, they're really useful, and I don't see people using them a lot. All you have to do is drag in a video into a shader editor, drag the color into the base color or anything like that, turn on auto refresh, specify the number of frames that you want the animation to run for, and there you go. Easy video texture. It's really fun to make them like an emission shader, for example. It just adds some life to it. And it just looks really cool to watch the light reflect off of other surfaces. I think this would be a really good way to add some atmosphere to any area that might have a projector or something like that. So I asked viewers for help with the bend tool in my first 100 video, and it turns out that it's really good, especially for things with like pipes or things like that. And you do need a lot more subdivision than just a cube or a subdivided cube. And once you have that, you press Shift W, and then you can begin to bend an object. I'm still fiddling with how the motion works, but I can see how once you've got it down, it would be really easy to create pipes and things like that with this. Alright, let's bring it back for number 75. If you hover over a color area, press Ctrl C and Ctrl V over another one, it'll just paste that color over. However, it's actually even easier than that. If you have a color that you want to copy over to
Só
another
através
color
de
parameter, all you have to do is actually just click and drag the color in. It's that fast, it's just one click. If you want to try out experimental Blender builds, all you have to do is go to blender.org, go to download, then you're going to scroll down to this big red bar and then choose download Blender experimental, and then you'll find all the bleeding edge builds where you can try things out like the cloth brush. If you're trying to stay organized in the node editor, one thing you can do is press Ctrl J to create frames out of your nodes. It's extremely useful for staying organized and making sure that nothing gets messy. Here's a cool topology tip. Ctrl T will triangulate faces and Alt J will convert faces to quads. All of these options are still available in the Control F panel. Has there ever been a time where you want to play your animation in reverse? Well, don't worry about pressing the button anymore, because now you can just press Control Shift Space bar, and it'll do all that for you. If your renders are taking you a long time, but you don't really have that much class in your scene, you can go down under Render, Light Paths, Caustics, and uncheck Refractive Caustics. Blender Guru has a pretty good video about render times, so I'd watch that if you have the chance sometime. Those integers after your operations. For instance, if you want to move something on the y-axis, you can go G, Y, 3, but then let's say you need it to be 3 times, I don't know, 86, but you don't know what that is. You can just type in the asterisk and then 86, and well, it'll do it for you. That's really far away. One of my favorite things recently has been animation modifiers. One of my favorites is the noise modifier. If you select a curve in the graph editor that you want to modify, and then you press the N key or click on this little arrow over here, it'll open up a side panel. In that side panel is a modifiers panel. You can go ahead and add a noise modifier, and it'll add all this little noise to your animation, which is awesome. You can if you drag this out, you can see what all these settings do, and you can hover over them to figure that out as well. One of them is strength. That's probably what you're going to be using the most. And now if you look at it, you got some nice upward movement with some noise. Really cool. Oh, by the way, keep in mind that you can do this with pretty much anything. You can animate pretty much anything. So you can make lights flicker, you could make textures pan, you could make colors transition, it's really up to you. Something I found out recently is that if you want for some reason to change the default interpolation from Bezier to something else, under animation and Blender preferences, there's an option for that. It's right here. You can change it to any of the interpolation types in Blender. And that means that whenever you add in any other animation, it will by default be whatever interpolation type you just specified. You can of course change that, but you don't even have to be in the graph editor. You can do it from the timeline. You can press T to open interpolation type, or V to change the handle type. This is just something that you'll learn from experience, but with larger and more complex models, something that is kind of important to keep in mind is to do details and passes. Start with the biggest details, which in this case, as you can see, is still just a big detail. It's a big hexagon that I started with. And then once you've done that, you can go in and add your secondary details, such as all of these beams and things like that. And then after that, go and add all the fine details, like these, are those speakers, or these grates, or these vents. When you think of it in terms of primary, secondary, and tertiary, it can make your whole process a lot less daunting. This is actually one of my favorite renders I've ever made, and I didn't even expect it to go this detailed. Just know that adding detail doesn't need to be a nightmare. Just break it down, and it should make it a lot easier. Speaking of animation modifiers, if you select part of an animation that you want to add a modifier to, as I said, you can open up the end panel, go down to modifiers, add a modifier. And this time let's talk about cycles. Basically, it's going to attempt to take what you've got already and just repeat it a bunch of times. And something that I found to be super cool is you can change these parameters right here, such as repeat with offset. And then what it's going to do is it's going to just play the animation that you had, except it's also going to offset it even further, so you can just repeat the motion up and up on whatever axis that you're trying to animate, or really whatever parameter at all. Or you could choose repeat mirror, and it's just going to do the same thing except, well, mirrored as you would expect. There's a lot to this modifier, and if you animate, this would be something that you should definitely check out. If you want to reset an animation to the start, you could do one of 3 different things. You could slide the timeline thing all the way back. You could press this tiny button right here, or you could press shift left arrow without even moving your mouse. Ever heard of knife project? Well, some people are having a little trouble getting it to work in Blender 2.8, so I thought I'd clear it up a bit. You select the object that you want to knife project onto the other object, then you select the object you want to be projected onto, go into edit mode on both of them, type in knife project, and make sure you're looking in the direction that you want it to be projecting, and hit it, and there it is. Essentially what it's done is taken your object and then just cut the shape of it into the other object, as if you had just cut it with a knife. You can see how this would be useful, especially if your booleans are giving you grief. If you're making a test render and then you hit F12, and then whoa, why is there this random object? Even though you have it hidden in the outliner, Well, it's because you didn't hide it from the render. If you hide something in the viewport, it'll still show up in the render. So by default, all you can do is hide it in the viewport, but if you toggle the view and render here, you can also turn it off in the render. Alternatively, you can go into the object, go to visibility, and uncheck show in renders. If you've got a mesh that has a whole bunch of holes in it, either after sculpting or something else, and you want to 3D print it or just don't want it to have a bunch of holes in it, you can go into edit mode and choose select non-manifold, and then press F or your fill option of choice. That's a real easy way to get rid of them. If you're feeling like you need to take a break from the whole tutorial grind, and you just want to learn about some topology, there's this website called topologyguides.com, which has some great stuff about topology. Any beginner learning about topology would benefit from starting here. Do you have edges that are being whack? Well, did you know that if you go under Control E, there's these rotate edge options. You can either rotate them clockwise or counterclockwise. It's a great way to reshape topology. Across all these keyboard shortcuts, maybe you figured one out that just doesn't seem like it's the right shortcut for what it is. Well, if you go into Blender Preferences, don't forget that you can actually edit the key map. I've also discovered it's a pretty great way for discovering new things. We do have a lot of animation ones this episode. Good stuff. Anyways, one of my favorite things recently is a little option in the object panel called motion paths. Just check calculate and basically it'll show you where the object will be at every single frame. If you want to create a hole in the center of something, you could just create two loop cuts to create a vertex in the center and then press Ctrl-Shift-B to bevel the vertex, and then you can change the profile and the segments to create a circle out of a square. And that's pretty cool. Did you know that in Blender, if you shift click and drag the corners instead of just dragging them, you can create an entirely new window, which I imagine would be super useful if you have a second monitor. Just drag it over and you can monitor things from this side right here. That would be super useful if you want to have like the shader editor on one side or graph editor. You'll just figure it out for your workflow and you just need to know this, so there's that. If you're an ArcViz person, designconnected.com has a whole bunch of free architectural models. They got tables, chairs, curtains, pretty much anything you could want for architecture. I mean, you might not find anything since their free collection is limited, especially compared to their paid collection, but it's a good amount of stuff and you might want to check it out. Speaking of free textures, I found a Behance post with more than 500 free textures. We have all these awesome free texture websites, so if you're just looking for something to start out your texture collection, this could be the one. Link in description. If you want to focus everything really fast, either in the shader editor or 3D viewport, you can just press the home key and it'll take care of it. It's tip number 100 now, so I gotta apply some wisdom. Something that you should probably do is take breaks watching Blender videos, just so that you can absorb the info better. I know a lot of you already do that, but if you are intending to take the information and use it, it's a good idea to pause, take notes, things like that. Tip 101, when you're orbiting your scene, you can hold Alt and then use your middle mouse button and it'll snap you to the nearest orthographic view. You can then do the same thing just to cycle through the different orthographic views. It feels pretty smooth and I can definitely recommend it to save some time. We've talked about how you can find an object in an outliner and then press the period key to find it in the viewport. Did you know you can do it the opposite way as well? You can select an object in the viewport and then press period in the outliner and it'll snap to that object so that you can rename it or whatever you want to do. Underlined letters and menus mean you can press that letter on the keyboard and it'll put you to that setting. So for instance, I could press Shift A and then as you can see M, C to add a cube. I imagine you probably get pretty fast with this, like watch me add a cube. How fast is that? How fast is that? In edit mode you can switch the smooth tool to a randomize tool. And well, I think that speaks for itself. It'd be a pretty easy way to add some random displacement. Another way to make circular topology is to use an add-on called Loop Tools. If you press the W key, you can get all the Loop Tools options. There's so many of them. One of the fan favorites is Circle, which as you can see allows you to create a circle out of a square, which as previously discussed is pretty cool. The Rip tool allows you to completely separate vertices and edges from whatever they were connected to. If you make it part of your workflow, you'll use it a lot when you start getting into more advanced modeling. Select Loop in a region allows you to select a loop and then go under Select Loops, select loop in a region, and then it will select everything that is within that loop. I found this to be super useful because, you know how it goes, you usually either use the circle tool and then individually select faces, but now you can just select the loop of that and then select loops. Boom. This next one's a little fiddly, but do you know how if you select vertices from edges, it'll still retain what you've selected? Well now, if you hold Control while doing this, it chooses to make it happen a little differently. It changes how it decides to include different vertices and edges. Just take a look at how this 4x4 area is affected if I go into edge mode and face mode without holding control, and then I hold control, edge mode, face mode. So it appears to select less, in fact. The Stored Views add-on allows you to do something similar to adding different cameras and then viewing your object from those cameras. So if you go into the End panel and you go into View, down at the bottom you'll find the Stored Views section. And if you want to save a current view, you just click Save Current. And you can do that a few times at different spots that you look at the object from when you're modeling. And then once you're ready, you can just click these buttons to go straight to those views. It's pretty quick, it's pretty useful, and of course you can delete them and change them and all of that. Oh, this one's also about stored views. It's pretty convenient. Let's say you found the perfect view. Once you're ready, you can just click this new camera to view, and it'll add a camera and do its best to estimate exactly what you're looking at and create a shot based on that. This is probably one of my favorites out of these, because I know you've seen it, but probably don't know what it does. It's called stereoscopy. I'm not sure exactly how that's pronounced, but if you check the box, it basically allows you to use 3D glasses, and that is so cool. Now this next one is an add-on that was recommended to me by a viewer. It's called Angle Tool, and I've heard it's very good for architecture especially. It is $10 on Blender Market, so I would suggest looking into it further and then deciding if that would be right for you. But I've always found that it's always good to be aware of all the add-ons that are available, even if you don't end up using them, just to be aware that it's an option. When I was a beginner, I kind of had problems putting the backdrop in the compositor, so I just want to clear that up for any beginners out there. You're going to actually need to put your output into a viewer node as well as a composite node, and then we'll put it in a backdrop. You're also going to have to turn on the backdrop in 2.8 with this right here, and then of course you can press the move buttons and the fit buttons and scale it to your liking and all that. I'm going to need to revisit the Symmetrize tool. It turns out it's actually insane for rigging and characters. Normal mirroring isn't the best for rigs, but as a lot of you guys have pointed out, Symmetrize is awesome for that. It even allows you to choose the axis that you're symmetrizing. It's a great tool that I highly recommend every modeler and animator takes a look at some point. The 2 sphere function, which you can also get with Shift-Alt-S, allows you to turn pretty much any mesh into sort of a spherical shape. It's not as perfect as a subdivided cube with a cast on it, but it's pretty close. And you can make a circle out of a square, which is pretty cool. If you want to work with the UVs of an object, but you're kind of done with some part of them, like the eyeballs here, you can select them in the UV editor with L and then press P to pin them, and that essentially means that they're going to stop moving for you when you unwrap it. And then you can work with the rest of the object without having to worry about those movements. Do be careful though, as I've found it to be kind of finicky and sometimes not working the way it should. You can unpin UVs using Alt-P, or by toggling this clear button when you pin things. Display.land is a mobile app that allows you to 3D scan objects with just your phone. It's an incredible alternative to Meshroom, especially for beginners, as it's really easy to pick up and use. Control X is a super easy dissolving shortcut that you might find useful. The easiest way to make an object follow a path is to add a path, add an object, align the object, select it, and then the path, press Ctrl P and follow path. And now if you scrub along the timeline, you'll see that the object is indeed following the path. You can change that path, of course, and make this thing. Shift-Alt-Control-S enables the shear tool, or as I like to do, shear. Huh, nice. So we all know that when you're in edit mode, you can press 1, 2, and 3 to go into vertex, edge, and face select modes, respectively, but if you hold shift while doing those, you can enable all of the other ones at the same time. Yes, that means you can select faces, edges, and vertices without ever having to switch modes. How neat is that? I happen to be a big fan of freestyle. It allows you to create renders, and then after that, it generates cool lines around the object. It's such a cool art style. But most of the options aren't under this freestyle box. You have to go under your layer properties and then under freestyle, and you'll find a whole bunch of things. For instance, this angle parameter, which can allow you to change how the edges themselves are detected automatically. This is terrifying, but it's one way to make a cool render. Speaking of freestyle edges, if you don't want to have it choose anything on its own at all, what you can do is turn on edge mark right here under edge types and disable everything else. Then you can go into your edit mode and select the edges that you want to show in freestyle. Hit Control E and choose mark freestyle edge. and then all of the freestyle edges that you've marked will show in the render, and no others. One of the coolest things about freestyle, I think, is all the modifiers. If you go down to freestyle line style down here, you can find strokes, color, alpha, thickness, geometry, and texture, and most of them have their own sets of modifiers. It's insane how many modifiers there are. So for instance, I could work with the color modifiers, add some noise, and then I can make this red to blue, and then when I turn on F12, you'll see that it uses that in coloring the freestyle. There's some great modifiers on the thickness that you can use to make it look hand-painted. Overall, it's just such a great tool, and I advise you, if you are looking into it, make sure to check out those modifiers, because it adds a lot to the experience. Tip number 125, this may be more of an inspiration tip than anything else, but did you know that you can change the icons of pretty much any app on your computer? Yeah, now imagine making all of them 3D versions with your own theme. Boy, do I want to make a video on that. In the node editor, you can select a node and press Ctrl-X to delete the node, but keep the connection with everything that's going through it. I really enjoy making renders like these. The technique I use is called dupliverts, and it's used to essentially take a texture and then duplicate an object over that plane a whole bunch of times. Here's how to accomplish that. Start with an object like a sphere, scale it down. I'm going to add in a plane, I'm going to scale that up. I'm going to subdivide it a whole bunch of times. Displace modifier, new texture, go to properties, change it to clouds. Preview in the viewport, go into the modifier settings, turn the strength down until it's appropriate, shade the object smooth, add one more subdivision surface modifier because why not? Set the plane as a parent of the sphere, head into the object panel on the plane, choose verts as instancing, select the original sphere and scale it how you like it. Oh, that is so cool. And then with the plane selected, uncheck display instancer and render instancer so that you don't have to see that plane in the bottom. You can also hide the original sphere if you want, and then you can add some materials to it and it'll duplicate it across this entire field. You can pretty much do that with anything. That's really awesome. Wow, that was fast. If you're working with UVs and you want part of the UV map to line up, you can select those two parts, those two edges, press V, and then you can press Enter, and it'll snap the UV map together at that spot. It's called stitching. If there's a spot that's really conspicuous and you just want to get rid of it, it could potentially be pretty simple for you to do so. These days we talk a lot about increment snapping, vertex snapping, edge, face, but do we ever talk about volume snapping? It works with everything, but I found it to be especially useful when working with bones, especially in orthographic view. You can hold control and it will snap it right to where it's supposed to be in the model. Like, let's say it's off to the side a little too much. I could hold control in here and it will snap it right into the center of the volume of whatever object you're trying to rig, and so that could be very useful for you. This next one is auto merge vertices. And before you say, oh, I already know this one, do you actually know where it is in 2.8? Because I had to look for it a bit. It's not in here. You choose snap to vertex, turn on this magnet, and then go over here to this little button above the shading options. And now it will merge the vertices. And now you can just press G and hover over another vertex, click, it will snap to that vertex and merge with it. So this is extremely useful for retopology, for those beginners out there. Let's say you've got an awkward spot like this that you just want to kind of fix. You can press G and snap it to somewhere else with little to no consequence. For most people, this is an essential part of their retopology arsenal. Can I interest you in some space? If you like space, you'll probably love the Nebula Generator add-on by Mark Kingsnorth. Now, it is $15 on Blender Market. I haven't purchased it myself, but it seems like those who have are happy with it, and the images are just stunning. So if you're a space kind of guy, you may want to pick this up. Another way to grant some more memory to the renderer is to go into the Render tab and choose Lock Interface. That means once you start rendering, the interface over here is going to lock up and you can't use it. And that way, as I said, it's going to give more memory to the renderer. Tell me if you've ever done something similar to what I'm about to do right now. Stop it. Don't do that. Ever again. Never. Okay, so now you're going to select all the faces and then choose I for inset, except then press I again. And it's going to inset each face individually. You're welcome.
Isto
One of the
devia
reasons
ter
I used to
volume.
not like to use cloth simulations a lot was
Mas o
because
volume serve.
I didn't like having to put up all the objects for it to
Falta
deform around.
simularem isto, pronto.
I know it's weird, but anyways, you can set up pin structures by adding a vertex group to your object in that object data tab, and then you select the objects that you want. You select the vertices you want to use as pins, click assign, and then you go into the physics tab where your cloth
Pronto.
simulation is, and
Tá
under
tudo.
shape, go under pin group, choose
Até
that
amanhã.
group, and now it should be